My name is Audrey, and at 34 years old, I never expected my husband to use pregnancy to orchestrate the ultimate betrayal. I sat at a corner booth in one of Chicago's exclusive steakhouses, watching the candlelight flicker across crystal wine glasses. Across from me sat Derek, my husband of 4 years, gently rubbing his 5-month pregnant belly. Next to him was his wealthy boss, Klaus, a man who had recently taken a suspiciously deep interest in our family planning. They thought I was just the quiet, practical wife who paid the bills. Believing I only spoke English, Derek leaned in close to Klaus, smiled warmly, and whispered in fluent German, "Do not worry, she has no idea. I will trick her into raising your child as hers." I did not scream or throw my plate. Instead, I calmly picked up the $2,000 bottle of vintage Merlot, pouring it slowly into Klaus' glass until it almost overflowed. I looked them dead in the eyes and replied in perfect, accentless German, "I might be blind in love, but I know how to audit a lie." Congratulations to the fathers. The color completely drained from Derek's face, and his fork clattered loudly against his porcelain plate. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who grossly underestimated your intelligence. You will definitely want to hear how I turned their perfect trap into a financial graveyard. To understand how I ended up at that table, you have to understand the sacrifices I made for the man I loved. I work as a forensic accountant for a top financial firm here in Chicago. My days are spent tracing hidden assets, hunting down corporate fraud, and dissecting complicated tax ledgers. I deal in hard facts and cold numbers. Derek, on the other hand, was a free spirit. He was a freelance graphic artist who struggled to find steady work. When we got married, I gladly took on the role of the primary provider. I loved him unconditionally, including his journey as a transgender man. When we decided we wanted to start a family, Derek made the incredibly brave choice to pause his hormone treatments so he could carry our child. The medical expenses were astronomical. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks to fund the endless rounds of in vitro fertilization, the specialized doctors, and the expensive medications. I drained my personal savings, pouring over $200,000 into making our dream a reality. So when he finally got pregnant 5 months ago, I thought we had won. I thought we were building a beautiful life together. I never questioned why Klaus, the CEO of a multinational logistics company, began taking them out to lavish lunches. I never questioned why Klaus insisted on paying for Derek's premium maternity wardrobe. I assumed he was just an eccentric, wealthy boss supporting a marginalized employee. I was so incredibly wrong. Sitting at that steakhouse, the pieces aggressively snapped together in my mind. The late-night texts Derek claimed were just work emergencies, the sudden influx of cash into his checking account, the way Klaus looked at my husband when he thought I was looking at the menu. The math had always been right there in front of me, but I refused to look. Klaus' confident smile vanished instantly as the Merlot pooled around the base of his glass, staining the white tablecloth. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Derek was hyperventilating, his hands trembling. "You speak German," Derek stammered, his voice terrified. "I learned it in college," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It comes in handy when auditing European shell companies, or listening to my husband confess to paternity fraud." I stood up, grabbing my purse. "Wait, Audrey." Klaus finally managed to say, his accent heavily laced with panic. "You are misunderstanding. We can explain everything. There is nothing to talk about," I said, sliding my platinum credit card out of my wallet and dropping it onto the table. "This card paid for your IVF and your hormones for the last 5 years. From this second forward, you can pay your own bills. Uber yourselves home." I turned my back and walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, the sharp click of my heels echoing very loudly now. I did not even make it to the valet stand before I heard the hurried, desperate footsteps behind me. The heavy mahogany doors of the steakhouse dining room swung open, and Derek stumbled into the expansive marble lobby. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He clutched his swollen stomach with both hands leaning heavily against the brass railing near the coat check counter. He began taking loud, exaggerated gasps of air, his chest heaving dramatically. The young hostess behind the podium and several well-dressed patrons waiting for their tables immediately turned their heads, their faces masked with sudden concern. "Audrey, please," Derek gasped out, making sure his voice carried loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. "You are scaring me. My heart is beating too fast. The stress is going to hurt the baby." I stood perfectly still watching him. It was a brilliant, disgusting tactic. He was weaponizing the pregnancy right in front of an audience. He wanted the bystanders to see him as the fragile pregnant victim and me as the unhinged abusive spouse. He wanted me to rush over, apologize, and sweep his massive betrayal under the rug just to avoid a public scene. But my tears had completely dried up the moment he spoke German at that table. Before I could even respond, Klaus strode out of the dining room right behind him. Klaus looked less like a guilty lover caught in a lie, and more like the ruthless corporate executive he was. He bypassed Derek completely and stepped directly into my personal space, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to physically intimidate me. "Listen to me very carefully," Audrey Klaus said, his voice low, guttural, and menacing. "You are clearly having some sort of severe mental breakdown. If you go around spreading these delusional, hysterical lies, I will have my corporate legal team bury you. I will sue you for slander, and I will personally ensure your accounting firm revokes your license. You will never work in finance in this city again. Do you understand me?" I looked from Klaus' flushed, angry face to Derek's pathetic theatrical display against the wall. They genuinely thought I was a weak, easily manipulated woman. Klaus thought his CEO title and the threat of corporate lawyers would force me into terrified, silent compliance. They had severely miscalculated. I reached into my designer leather bag and pulled out my metallic platinum credit card. I held it up between my index and middle fingers, letting the warm, ambient lights of the lobby catch its reflective silver surface. "This card," I said, my voice incredibly steady and sharp enough to cut glass, "paid for every single round of your IVF, Derek. It paid for your specialized hormone treatments for the last 5 years. It paid for the custom-tailored suit you are wearing right now, and it paid for the down payment on the car you drove here in." I opened my fingers. The heavy metal card hit the solid marble floor with a sharp, distinct clatter that echoed loudly through the suddenly dead silent lobby. The bystanders were now watching us with wide eyes, completely captivated by the scene. From this exact second forward, I continued stepping right past Klaus without breaking eye contact. "You can pay your own bills. Uber yourselves home." I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out into the crisp, biting Chicago evening air. The valet already had my car waiting at the curb. I handed him a $20 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and immediately locked the doors. My hands were shaking just a little bit now that I was finally alone in the dark cabin of my car, but my mind was operating with a terrifying absolute clarity. The marriage was over. Now it was a financial war. I put the car in drive, ready to head back to my house, secure my documents, and figure out my immediate next move. But before my foot could even press down on the gas pedal, my phone screen lit up brightly in the center console cup holder. It was a push notification from my mobile banking application. I picked the phone up and stared at the glowing screen, my blood running completely cold. It was a withdrawal alert. Exactly $10,000 had just been transferred out of my primary joint checking account and routed to an external account I did not recognize. Derek was not just a liar putting on a panic attack in a restaurant lobby. While he was faking hyperventilation, he was actively using his phone to drain my liquid assets. He was moving incredibly fast, trying to empty my accounts before I could freeze them. But Derek had just made his first fatal mistake. You never leave a digital financial trail when your wife is a forensic accountant. The drive from the steakhouse to my house in Lincoln Park usually takes 20 minutes. Tonight I made it in 12. My mind was racing, calculating the exact steps I needed to take to lock down my financial empire. The $10,000 withdrawal was just a test run. Derek was going to try to bleed me dry. I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street, fully prepared to march inside, change the locks, and start freezing accounts. But as my headlights swept across my driveway, I slammed on the brakes. Two Chicago Police Department cruisers were parked at steep angles across my perfectly manicured lawn. Their red and blue lights sliced silently through the dark night, reflecting off the large bay windows of my $1.5 million home. The home I had bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears before we were even married. Two officers were standing on my front porch. As I put the car in park and stepped out, one of them shined a bright flashlight directly into my eyes. "Ma'am, are you Audrey?" The officer asked, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. I shielded my eyes and nodded, maintaining a perfectly level voice. "Yes, officer. This is my property. What is going on?" The older officer stepped forward, lowering the flashlight. "Your husband called 911 about 30 minutes ago. He stated that you suffered a severe psychological breakdown at a restaurant this evening. He claims you became extremely hostile, threatened him, and that your behavior is currently posing an immediate danger to his high-risk pregnancy." I had to hand it to Derek. He had played his hand flawlessly. He knew he could not beat me in a financial debate, so he ran straight to the police to paint me as the dangerous aggressor. He was using the unborn child, Klaus child, as a human shield to hijack my house. "Ma'am." The second officer chimed in, looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Illinois law takes threats to pregnant spouses very seriously. Given the emotional state your husband is in, we are enforcing a mandatory 48-hour cooling-off period. We need you to vacate the premises for the next 2 days to ensure the safety of the unborn child." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to fight back, to tell the police that the pregnancy was a fraud, that the baby belonged to his boss, and that Derek had just stolen $10,000 from my bank account. But I am a forensic accountant. I know better than anyone that whoever loses their temper first in a legal battle loses the war. If I raised my voice, if I argued with the police, it would be documented in the official incident report. It would become evidence of the exact erratic behavior Derek was accusing me of. I would not give him the satisfaction. "I understand, officers," I said calmly, smoothing down the front of my designer coat. "I will fully cooperate. I just need to go inside and pack an overnight bag for work tomorrow." The officers exchanged a look and agreed, provided they escort me inside. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet, smelling faintly of the expensive lavender diffusers I had purchased last week. In the kitchen, standing safely behind the massive marble island, was Derek. He had a glass of water in his hand and was clutching his stomach, his shoulders trembling. He looked like the picture of vulnerable innocence. But as the officers turned their heads to inspect the hallway, Derek locked eyes with me. The trembling stopped instantly. The corners of his mouth twitched upwards into a cold, arrogant smirk. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had claimed the castle and kicked the queen out into the cold. I did not break eye contact as I walked past him and headed straight up the stairs to our master bedroom, closely followed by the younger officer. I pulled a small leather duffel bag from the closet and began tossing in a few tailored suits, some blouses, and my toiletries. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, projecting absolute submission. But my real objective was in the adjacent home office. "Officer," I said politely, gesturing toward the office door, "I just need to grab my laptop charger for my presentation tomorrow morning." He nodded and stepped aside. I walked into the dark office. My work laptop sat on the mahogany desk. Right next to it was a small, unassuming black rectangular device. My encrypted biometric hard drive. It contained every piece of confidential financial data I was currently auditing, including the offshore tax ledgers for Klaus Logistics Company. I slipped the heavy drive into the hidden zippered pocket of my duffel bag, right beneath my silk scarves. Then I grabbed the charger, thanked the officer, and zipped the bag shut. I walked back downstairs. Derek was still standing in the kitchen, watching my every move like a hawk. The police escorted me to the front door. I handed my house keys to the older officer, as requested, stepped out onto the porch, and walked back to my car without looking back. Derek had just successfully locked me out of my own home and stolen $10,000. He thought he had won the opening battle. But as I pulled out of my driveway and watched my house shrink in the rearview mirror, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. He had no idea I had just walked out the front door holding the nuclear launch codes to his entire new life. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a downtown luxury hotel just after midnight. I did not bother with the valet. I carried my single overnight bag to the front desk, handed the night concierge my corporate credit card, and requested a suite on the highest floor with the fastest, most secure internet connection they had available. 10 minutes later, I was sitting at a heavy oak desk in a silent, perfectly sterile room, staring out at the glowing Chicago skyline. I did not cry. I did not stare at my wedding ring or wonder where it all went wrong. I unzipped my bag, pulled out my encrypted work hard drive, and immediately dialed my brother-in-law, DeAndre. DeAndre is not just family. He is a razor-sharp African-American tax attorney who spent 8 grueling years as a financial investigator for the IRS before moving to the private sector to manage high-net-worth trusts. He is married to my sister Jasmine, and he is the one person in my life whose brain works exactly like mine. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Audrey," he said, the sound of rustling sheets echoing through the speaker. "It is past midnight. What is wrong?" "Derek is trying to steal everything," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of panic. "He is pregnant with his boss child. They are trying to frame me for domestic abuse to keep me out of the house. He just transferred 10 grand out of the joint account, and I need you to help me lock down every single asset I own before the sun comes up." There was a split second of dead silence on the line. Then I heard the distinct sound of DeAndre throwing off his heavy covers and his feet hitting the hardwood floor. He did not offer useless sympathy. He did not ask a dozen emotional questions about how I was feeling. He simply switched into absolute war mode. "Give me 2 minutes to boot up my desktop," DeAndre said, his tone turning ice cold. "Start freezing the primary checking accounts right now. I am going to pull the county property records and your recent tax filings. We will put a financial chokehold on him by morning." I opened my laptop and connected the encrypted drive. I navigated directly to my banking portal. I had already mentally prepared myself to see the $10,000 withdrawal Derek made from the restaurant lobby. But as the dashboard loaded on my screen, a brand new pending transaction caught my eye, draining the available balance even further. It was a charge for exactly $5,200 at an exclusive high-end maternity and nursery boutique in downtown Chicago. The card used was the secondary joint debit card, the one I had given to Derek's mother Brenda, strictly for emergency groceries when she visited. Derek was not just stealing my money. He had already unleashed his mother. Brenda was actively using my hard-earned salary to buy luxury cribs and imported changing tables for a child that belonged to a German logistics CEO. The sheer unadulterated entitlement of it made my blood run cold. I did not hesitate. With 3 rapid clicks, I canceled every single card attached to the joint account. I flagged the $5,000 purchase as fraudulent, which would immediately trigger a freeze and a bank investigation. Brenda was going to get a very nasty, embarrassing surprise at the checkout counter tomorrow. "DeAndre, I have isolated the cash leak," I said, keeping the phone pressed to my ear as my fingers flew across the keyboard. "I am locking him out of the investment portfolios next. Check the deed to the Lincoln Park house. I want to make sure he cannot try to leverage the property in the divorce filing tomorrow morning." I heard the rapid, rhythmic clicking of DeAndre typing on his mechanical keyboard. He was tapped directly into the county clerk database. But suddenly the typing stopped. The silence on the line stretched out for 5 seconds, then 10. "DeAndre." I prompted, my fingers hovering over my own trackpad. "What are you looking at?" "Audrey." DeAndre said, his voice dropping an octave, completely losing its previous rapid-fire energy. When did you authorize a second mortgage on the Lincoln Park property? My stomach hit the floor. I did not, I replied, every muscle in my back tensing. I own that house outright. The original mortgage was paid off 2 years ago. I am looking at a digitally filed property deed right now, DeAndre said, the sound of his mouse clicking furiously. 3 weeks ago, a lien was placed on your house for $250,000. It was authorized by a limited liability company based out of Delaware. The signature on the authorization form matches yours perfectly. I stared blankly at the hotel wall. Derek and Klaus had not just planned to drain my checking accounts or steal my house in a divorce. They had actively forged my signature to take out a $250,000 loan against my property, likely using Klaus corporate resources to push the paperwork through quickly. They were trying to leave me buried under a mountain of fraudulent debt. But they had made a massive miscalculation. They forgot that I hunt financial ghosts for a living. I barely slept that night. My mind was a steel trap, methodically cataloging the $250,000 fraudulent lien Derek and Klaus had slapped on my house. By 6 in the morning, I had already showered, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, and mapped out a dozen different legal landmines for them to step on. I was pouring a cup of terrible hotel room coffee when my cell phone buzzed on the glass table. The caller identification flashed with a picture I had taken 3 years ago at a Thanksgiving dinner. It was Brenda, my mother-in-law. I set the coffee down. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I picked up my work phone and quickly routed the incoming call through my corporate recorded line. In the state of Illinois, recording a phone call typically requires two-party consent. However, because she was calling a registered corporate number with an automated compliance warning beep, her continued speech legally constituted consent. The trap was set. I pressed the green accept button and put the phone on speaker. I did not say hello, I just let the silence hang. Audrey Brenda's voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, condescending tone. I am so glad you finally picked up. In the background, I could hear the distinct whir of my expensive Italian espresso machine. She was standing in my kitchen using my appliances, acting like the lady of the manor. Derek was an absolute wreck last night after you terrorized him at that restaurant. Brenda continued, her voice taking on a sharp, scolding edge. I had to pack a bag and rush over here to Lincoln Park to protect him and the baby. The police told us you are not allowed back here for 2 days. Frankly, I think you need to use this time to check yourself into a psychiatric facility. Your behavior is completely unacceptable. I remained perfectly silent. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, opened my laptop, and began typing out a real-time transcript of her confession to occupying my property. You should be on your knees thanking my son every single day, Brenda sneered, mistaking my strategic silence for guilt or submission. He paused his entire life for you. He stopped his hormone therapy. He is destroying his body to carry this child because you were too obsessed with your little corporate numbers game to be a real mother. And how do you repay his incredible sacrifice? You throw a hysterical fit in public. You are lucky he is even willing to put your name on the birth certificate at this point. It was a masterful display of gaslighting. She was completely flipping the narrative, painting the cheating, embezzling husband as a saint and the betrayed wife as an unhinged monster. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to argue so she could put me on speakerphone and let Derek record my supposed mental breakdown. But I gave her nothing. My silence only made her bolder. She interpreted my lack of response as weakness, and arrogant people love to boast when they think they have already won the war. You think you hold all the cards just because you pay the mortgage? Brenda scoffed, her voice echoing slightly as she clearly moved from my kitchen into my spacious living room. Well, you are in for a very rude awakening, Audrey. Derek does not need your measly accountant salary anymore. He is finally with a real man who knows how to provide. Klaus treats him like absolute royalty. Still, I said nothing. I just watched the audio waveforms jumping across my laptop screen, capturing every single word of her vile monologue. In fact, Brenda bragged, lowering her voice slightly, as if sharing an exclusive high society secret. Klaus is so dedicated to this new family that he is finalizing the paperwork to move his entire European corporate headquarters right here to Chicago next month. He wants to be close to his son, so you can take your little bank accounts and your terrible attitude and disappear. My son is going to be living a billionaire lifestyle, while you are left completely alone. She let out a short, triumphant laugh and hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet hotel room staring at the call-ended screen. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Brenda thought she had just delivered the ultimate devastating blow, but she was too foolish to realize what she had actually done. By legally admitting that Klaus was moving his corporate headquarters to Chicago, she had just handed me the missing piece of the puzzle. It meant Klaus was shifting international assets onto United States soil. It meant his offshore tax evasion and the fraudulent lien on my house were about to fall directly under the strict jurisdiction of the federal government. She had just given me the exact ammunition I needed to call the authorities. I packed my laptop and left the hotel, driving straight to the glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district that housed my accounting firm. I was ready to dive into the firm's secure servers to verify the trail of Klaus' corporate money. I walked through the revolving doors, adjusting my charcoal suit jacket, and approached the security turnstiles. I tapped my employee badge against the scanner. Instead of the usual cheerful green beep, the machine let out a harsh red buzz. The glass gates remained locked tight. I tried again. Red light. A heavy-set security guard stepped out from behind the marble desk, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He told me my access had been manually revoked by upper management at 6 in the morning. Before I could ask any questions, the elevator chimed, and my boss, Mr. Harrison, stepped into the lobby. He was the senior managing partner, a man who cared about billable hours and high-profile clients above all else. He did not invite me upstairs to his corner office. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him into a small windowless meeting room just off the main lobby. He closed the door securely, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. Audrey. He started, his tone a mix of corporate distance and awkward pity. We have a very serious situation on our hands. Klaus called my personal cell phone before dawn this morning, Mr. Harrison continued, crossing his arms. He informed me about the incident at the restaurant last night. Klaus stated that you suffered a severe psychological episode, acted erratically, and threatened both him and your pregnant husband. Klaus is one of our most lucrative international clients. He officially demanded that you be removed from all of his accounts immediately, citing concerns over your mental stability and the security of his financial data. Because of the severity of his claims, Human Resources has mandated your immediate suspension pending a full internal investigation. Klaus was moving aggressively to cut off my resources. He knew that with my full firm access, I could easily track the millions he was moving from Germany to Chicago to fund his new life with Derek. By labeling me mentally unstable, he was discrediting me before I could blow the whistle. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of corporate chess, trapping the queen before she could even move across the board. But Klaus was arrogant, and arrogant men always underestimate the women they try to destroy. I knew exactly what I had to do. If I fought back right then, if I told Mr. Harrison about the affair and the embezzlement, I would just sound exactly like the hysterical, vindictive woman Klaus painted me to be. So I gave Mr. Harrison the exact performance he expected. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my breathing to become shallow and uneven. I looked down at my hands, allowing them to tremble visibly. I am just going through a really difficult time at home, I whispered, letting a single, perfectly timed tear slip down my cheek. The stress of the pregnancy has been overwhelming. I understand the firm has to protect its interests, Mr. Harrison visibly relaxed, clearly relieved that I was not going to make a scene or threaten a wrongful termination lawsuit. He offered a few empty platitudes about taking time to rest and prioritize my mental health, then escorted me back out to the bustling Chicago street. The morning commute rush was in full swing, businessmen and women hurrying past with their coffees. I walked a block down the street to the parking garage where I had left my car. The moment the heavy metal door of the parking garage closed behind me, cutting off the noise of the city, the fragile weeping persona vanished entirely. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. My posture straightened, and a cold, chilling smile spread across my face. I walked to my car, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor, feeling more powerful than I had ever felt in my entire life. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I reached into my overnight bag resting on the passenger seat and bypassed the clothes and toiletries. My fingers wrapped around the small, heavy black rectangular device, my encrypted biometric hard drive. I pulled it out and set it carefully on the center console. Klaus thought he had won by locking me out of the firm's servers this morning. He thought he had severed my access to his financial secrets. He had no idea that I had already downloaded his logistics company offshore tax ledgers, the Cayman Islands wire transfers, and the dummy corporation records late last night, before the suspension even took effect. He had just successfully locked the vault door, completely unaware that I was already sitting in my car holding all of the gold. I pulled out of the downtown parking garage and drove straight to the leafy suburbs where my sister Jasmine and DeAndre lived. By the time I pulled into their driveway, I had completely compartmentalized the morning events. I was no longer a betrayed wife or a suspended employee. I was a forensic accountant on the hunt. Jasmine opened the front door before I even reached the porch. She did not offer me a sympathetic hug or ask me how I was feeling. She knew me better than that. She just handed me a massive mug of black coffee and pointed toward their formal dining room. DeAndre had already transformed the large mahogany table into a makeshift financial war room. 3 high-resolution monitors were connected to his secure legal server, and stacks of blank legal pads were waiting for us. I set my coffee down, unzipped my bag, and pulled out the encrypted biometric hard drive. I pressed my thumb against the security scanner. A small green light flashed, and I plugged it directly into DeAndre's central hub. Let us see what Klaus is hiding in the dark. DeAndre set his fingers flying across his keyboard as the decrypted folders populated on the main screen. Where do you want to start? Start with the blood, I replied, taking a sip of the scalding coffee. Pull up the exact dates and routing numbers for the $200,000 I transferred to the fertility clinic over the last 2 years. I want to see exactly where my money went. DeAndre pulled up my bank statements on the left monitor while I accessed the clinic billing records I had secured from the joint account ledger. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. My payments went into the clinic primary operating account to cover the cost of the specialized hormone therapy, the egg extraction, and the in vitro fertilization procedures. But as I cross-referenced the clinic incoming wire logs with the dates of Derek appointments, a bizarre pattern began to emerge. Look at this, I said, pointing a pen at the screen. Every time I made a legitimate payment for Derek treatment, an identical, perfectly matched deposit was made into the clinic account from an external source exactly 48 hours later. They were labeled as anonymous charitable donations designated for Derek's specific patient file. DeAndre leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. Why would a wealthy donor subsidize a patient who was already fully funded by you? That makes 0 sense, unless the clinic is cooking the books. They are not keeping the money. I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster as the adrenaline kicked in. Track the outgoing SWIFT codes from the clinic operating account at the end of each fiscal quarter. DeAndre ran the search. The results cascaded down the screen in a blur of text. Every single dollar from those anonymous donations, plus a massive influx of additional capital, was being quietly routed out of the Chicago clinic and wired to an offshore banking institution. I know that routing prefix, DeAndre muttered, his jaw clenching. That is a bank in the Cayman Islands, a notorious tax haven. The clinic is acting as a pass-through entity. Someone is funneling money into the clinic disguised as medical donations, washing it through the domestic healthcare system and then transferring it offshore. I opened the offshore tax ledgers I had downloaded from Klaus' corporate files. Klaus was the CEO of a massive logistics empire. He moved shipping containers all over the world, which meant he had access to endless international accounts. I ran a search algorithm matching the Cayman Islands routing numbers DeAndre found against Klaus' private corporate ledgers. The computer processed the data for 10 agonizing seconds. Then a match flashed on the screen. The Cayman account belonged to a private shell company called Horizon Ventures Limited. I opened the corporate registry files for Horizon Ventures. The listed owner of the shell company was Klaus, but he was not the one with access to the funds. I scrolled down to the beneficiary section of the trust attached to the account. I stopped breathing. Jasmine, who had been quietly watching over my shoulder, let out a sharp gasp. The sole legal beneficiary of the offshore trust holding over $3 million in washed funds was Derek. "This was never just an affair," DeAndre whispered, leaning back in his chair in absolute disbelief. "He is right," I said, my voice eerily calm as I stared at my husband's name on the screen. Klaus was not just a wealthy boss sleeping with his employee, and he was not just donating his sperm to start a family. Klaus is actively embezzling millions of dollars from his German parent company. He used Derek YYVEF treatments as a legitimate domestic front to wash the stolen corporate funds before hiding them offshore. The pregnancy is not a miracle. The baby is quite literally a money laundering scheme, and Derek is his willing accomplice. I left DeAndre and Jasmine staring at the glowing monitors and walked out into the brisk afternoon air. The digital money trail had proven the embezzlement, but I needed the physical proof of my legal liability. I drove straight back into downtown Chicago, navigating the heavy traffic with a singular, sharp focus. I was heading to the premier fertility clinic where Derek had received his treatments. The same clinic I had faithfully wired $200,000 to over the last 2 years. The clinic was located on the top floor of a high-end medical high-rise. I walked out of the elevator and stepped into the luxurious waiting room. It was designed to look more like a 5-star spa than a medical facility. Plush white leather chairs, soft ambient lighting, and the faint sound of classical piano music playing through hidden speakers. I walked straight up to the marble reception desk, ignoring the perfectly polite greeting from the young woman sitting behind the glass. "I need to speak with the clinic administrator immediately," I said, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "I am Audrey, the legal spouse of Derek. I need to review the physical financial consent forms for all of his in vitro fertilization cycles." The receptionist blinked, her professional smile faltering. "I am sorry, ma'am," she stammered, "but we require at least 48 hours written notice to pull physical archives. Plus, the patient needs to be present for any records release." I placed both of my hands flat on the cool marble counter and leaned in slightly. "I am a forensic accountant," I said smoothly. "I am currently conducting a comprehensive financial audit on $250,000 of marital assets that were funneled through this exact facility. I also have evidence that your clinic received offshore wire transfers from a Cayman Islands shell company disguised as anonymous medical donations. Now you can either go to the back room and hand me the physical file right now, or I can walk out those doors and have a federal subpoena delivered to your chief medical officer by tomorrow morning. Which option do you prefer?" The receptionist went completely pale. She picked up her phone, dialed a quick extension, and whispered frantically. 2 minutes later, a nervous-looking man in a tailored suit hurried out from a back office. He introduced himself as the operations director. He did not argue with me. He simply handed over a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder and directed me to a private consultation room. I sat down at the small glass table, closed the door, and opened the file. I bypassed the medical histories, the ultrasound printouts, and the hormone injection logs. I was looking for one specific document: the financial guarantor and parental responsibility agreement. In the state of Illinois, when a married couple undergoes alternative reproductive treatments, the non-birthing spouse must sign a legally binding document accepting full financial and parental responsibility for the resulting child. I knew Derek was planning to use this exact law to bleed me dry in divorce court. He was going to claim that because we were married when he got pregnant, I was legally obligated to pay him thousands of dollars in monthly child support for the next 18 years. I assumed I was going to find a clumsy forgery of my signature on the bottom line, just like the fraudulent lien on my house. I found the document tucked in the very back of the folder. I ran my finger down the dense legal text, scanning the paragraphs until I reached the signature block. I stopped breathing. I stared at the ink on the page, my mind racing to process what I was looking at. My name was nowhere on the document. There was no forged signature. Instead, the financial guarantor line was signed with the messy, looping scrawl of Klaus. Right below his signature was the official blue ink stamp of a Delaware-based limited liability company, Horizon Medical Ventures. Klaus had used a corporate entity to legally sponsor the entire IVF process. Suddenly, the entire twisted strategy made perfect sense. Klaus was an arrogant, controlling billionaire. He did not want to risk a messy custody battle with me if his affair with Derek was ever exposed. He wanted absolute, undisputed ownership of the child. By signing as the corporate guarantor and funding the procedure through his shell company, Klaus had intentionally bypassed my legal rights entirely. He had legally claimed the child as his own financial responsibility before it was even conceived. The sheer irony of the situation almost made me laugh out loud in the quiet room. Derek and his greedy mother thought they had me trapped in an inescapable 18-year financial prison. They thought my high salary was going to fund their luxurious new lifestyle through court-ordered child support. But they are not lawyers, and they clearly did not read the fine print of Klaus' arrogant corporate maneuvering. Because I did not sign the consent forms, and because my signature was not even forged on the parental agreement, I am legally nothing to this unborn child. I am not the mother. I am not the financial guarantor. I am completely, legally off the hook. I closed the manila folder and handed it back to the nervous director on my way out. Derek was preparing to declare war in family court, completely unaware that his own lover had already signed away my obligation to pay him a single dime. I left the fertility clinic feeling lighter than I had in 5 years. The heavy, suffocating weight of being trapped in a marriage with a parasite had completely vanished. I drove to River North and met Jasmine at a bustling, upscale coffee shop. The place was packed with young professionals, the air thick with the smell of roasted espresso and the loud hum of midday meetings. I slid into a small leather booth across from my sister and handed her a printed copy of the clinic guarantor form. I watched her eyes scan the page, her expression morphing from confusion to absolute shock as she read Klaus' corporate signature. "He signed it," Jasmine whispered, looking up at me in disbelief. "The billionaire actually signed the financial liability waiver. You do not owe Derek a single penny for this baby." "Not a dime," I replied, taking a slow sip of my iced latte. Klaus was so desperate to maintain ultimate control over his biological child that he legally erased me from the equation. Derek thinks he has me backed into a corner, but he is standing on a trapdoor and his lover already pulled the lever. Before Jasmine could celebrate, a tall, heavy-set man, wearing a faded windbreaker and carrying a thick manila envelope, walked up to our table. He did not look like he belonged in a high-end coffee shop. He looked directly at me, his eyes flicking down to a photograph he was holding in his left hand. "Are you Audrey?" he asked, his voice completely flat and carrying loudly over the chatter of the cafe. I placed my coffee down. "Yes, I am." The man dropped the heavy manila envelope directly onto my lap. "Consider yourself served," he announced loudly. Several heads turned in our direction. A group of women at the next table stopped talking and stared. The process server did not care about the spectacle. He pulled a small digital tablet and a stylus from his pocket, holding it out toward me. "I need your signature acknowledging receipt of the petition for dissolution of marriage." Jasmine's face flushed with immediate hot anger. She slammed her hand down on the table, rattling our coffee cups. "Are you kidding me?" she snapped at the server. "You could not do this privately. You had to track her down in public to embarrass her." "It is just my job, lady," the server mumbled, looking bored. I placed a calming hand on my sister's arm. Jasmine? It is fine, I said smoothly. I picked up the thick envelope and pulled out the legal documents. The front page was stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Family Court. Derek had aggressively rushed to the courthouse first thing this morning to file for divorce. He wanted to strike first, hoping the shock and public humiliation would force me into a quick, quiet settlement. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal demands. It was a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated greed. Derek was petitioning for exclusive ownership of my $1.5 million Lincoln Park house. He was demanding a staggering $15,000 a month in permanent spousal support, claiming he had sacrificed his own lucrative career to manage our household. And worst of all, he was demanding maximum state-mandated child support for the next 18 years. In his sworn affidavit, he accused me of severe emotional abuse and financial abandonment during his vulnerable, high-risk pregnancy. This is completely insane, Jasmine hissed, leaning over the table to read the demands. He is asking for everything you have ever worked for. He is trying to completely bankrupt you. Give me your phone. I am calling DeAndre right now. We are going to bury him. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. Do not call DeAndre yet. I looked at my sister, my expression perfectly composed. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a fatal mistake, Jasmine. She stared at me, her anger giving way to confusion. What are you talking about? He is trying to ruin you. He is trying to, I corrected her. But look at what he just did. By filing this specific petition, Derek just legally swore under oath, under penalty of perjury, that I am the financial guarantor of his pregnancy. He is demanding child support for a baby he knows is not mine, using medical documents he knows were funded by stolen corporate money. He just documented his own fraud in federal family court. I turned back to the process server, who was still standing awkwardly by our table holding out his digital tablet. I did not yell. I did not cry. I picked up the plastic stylus. With a perfectly calm, genuine smile, I signed my name in clear, bold letters across the screen. I handed the tablet back to him, officially accepting the receipt of the documents. Derek wanted a war, and I had just graciously accepted his invitation to the battlefield. 2 weeks later, I walked into the sprawling glass conference room of a prestigious family law firm in downtown Chicago for our first mandatory mediation session. The air conditioning was turned up high, making the room feel like an icebox. Across the massive mahogany table sat Derek. He was wearing a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater that perfectly accentuated his swollen belly. He had dark circles expertly applied under his eyes, using makeup to make himself look exhausted and fragile. Sitting directly behind Derek, acting as his supposed moral support, was Klaus. Klaus wore a sharp navy blue Italian suit and sat with his legs crossed casually at the ankle. He looked around the room with an expression of supreme boredom, as if being here was a minor inconvenience in his busy billionaire schedule. Next to Derek sat his aggressive divorce attorney, a man known for bullying spouses into submission. My brother-in-law DeAndre sat next to me, serving as my legal counsel. We had spent the entire weekend rehearsing this exact meeting. The objective was simple: feed their massive egos until they were so blind with arrogance that they walked right off a cliff. The mediation began exactly as expected. Derek, lawyer, launched into a dramatic monologue about the severe emotional trauma I had supposedly inflicted on his client. He painted a picture of a vulnerable pregnant man who had been cast aside by a cold, unfeeling corporate wife. He reiterated the demands from the divorce petition. Derek wanted exclusive use of the $1.5 million house. He wanted $15,000 a month in spousal support, and he wanted full child support for the next 18 years. Throughout the lawyer's speech, Derek kept his eyes cast downward. Every few minutes, he would let out a soft, shaky sigh and gently rub his stomach. Klaus would reach forward and rest a reassuring hand on Derek's shoulder. It was a perfectly choreographed performance designed to make me look like a monster. When the lawyer finally finished, it was my turn to speak. The mediator, a stern older woman, peered at me over her glasses, waiting for my defense. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump forward perfectly, mimicking the posture of a completely broken woman. I looked across the table at Derek and forced my voice to crack just slightly. "I do not want to fight anymore, Derek," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am exhausted. If keeping the house is what you need to feel safe during the rest of the pregnancy, then I will not fight you for it. You can stay in the Lincoln Park house until the baby is born." The shift in the room was instantaneous. Derek had snapped up, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief. He had expected a brutal, drawn-out legal battle over the property. He had prepared for me to fight tooth and nail. Handing over the house this easily was a complete shock. A slow, triumphant smile began to spread across his face. He looked back at Klaus, who gave a subtle, arrogant nod. They thought they had broken me. They thought the threat of public humiliation and the aggressive legal posturing had forced me to surrender. DeAndre played his part perfectly, acting visibly frustrated next to me and shaking his head as if I was making a terrible mistake against his legal advice. "There is just one minor thing I need in return." I continued, wiping an imaginary tear from the corner of my eye. "I am willing to discuss the $15,000 a month in spousal support. But as an accountant, I cannot legally sign off on that amount without a complete picture of your current financial support system. Since Klaus has been paying for your living expenses and your medical bills through his company, I need to verify your actual financial deficit." Derek, lawyer, immediately opened his mouth to object, but Klaus raised a hand, silencing him. Klaus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the heavy mahogany table. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "You want to look at my company finances?" Klaus asked, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "You think you are going to find some hidden payroll for Derek in my logistics ledgers?" "I just need to run a standard baseline calculation," I replied, keeping my eyes downcast and my voice meek. "I need full access to your corporate tax filings and domestic operating ledgers for the past 2 years, just to ensure the alimony calculation is compliant with state guidelines. It is a very standard request when a third party is financially involved." Klaus let out a short, dismissive laugh. He was so incredibly arrogant, so completely convinced of his own superiority, that he did not even hesitate. He viewed me as a defeated, crying housewife, grasping at useless paperwork to make herself feel important. "Fine," Klaus said, waving his hand dismissively. "I will have my accounting department send over the domestic tax filings and the operating ledgers by tomorrow morning. Look through them all you want, Audrey. You will see exactly what I want you to see. My company makes hundreds of millions of dollars. You are not going to find anything that helps you get out of paying your husband." I nodded slowly, keeping my head lowered so they could not see the expression on my face. The mediator formally noted the agreement on the record. Derek got the temporary rights to my house, and I got the keys to Klaus' corporate kingdom. They both walked out of that conference room celebrating their massive victory. They had absolutely no idea that I had just tricked a billionaire into legally handing over the exact financial records I needed to send him to federal prison. The very next morning, exactly as promised, an encrypted zip file arrived in my inbox from the accounting department of Klaus Logistics Company. Klaus was so confident in his own invincibility that he had actually authorized the release of his domestic financial ledgers to his supposedly hysterical, soon-to-be ex-wife. I sat at DeAndre dining room table sipping a fresh cup of coffee and downloaded the file. To an untrained eye, the ledgers looked completely flawless. Klaus had hired some of the most expensive corporate accountants in Chicago to balance his books. The revenue streams matched the operating expenses. The tax liabilities were perfectly calculated. There were no glaring red flags, no sloppy accounting errors. It was a masterpiece of corporate compliance. But Klaus had forgotten one critical detail. He was showing me the polished, finalized numbers. He did not know that I already possessed the raw, unfiltered data from my encrypted biometric hard drive. I opened my hard drive and pulled up the confidential offshore tax ledgers I had downloaded before my suspension. I placed the 2 sets of books side by side on my dual monitors. This is what forensic accountants live for: the hunt for the invisible thread that unravels the entire sweater. I started running a comparative algorithm cross-referencing the incoming international wire transfers on his clean books with the internal SWIFT codes from the hidden offshore drive. For the first 2 hours, nothing stood out. But then I filtered the data to isolate transactions routed through Horizon Ventures Limited, the Cayman Islands shell company Klaus used to fund Derek fertility treatments. Suddenly, the screen lit up with discrepancies. It was not just a few $1,000s here and there, it was an absolute financial bloodbath. Klaus was not just funneling his personal wealth into the Cayman account. He was actively embezzling massive amounts of capital directly from his German parent company. He was fabricating devastating logistical losses in his European shipping routes. According to the internal communications I found, he claimed that several massive shipping containers had been lost at sea or confiscated by foreign customs. The German parent company was writing off these millions of euros as catastrophic corporate losses. But those containers were never lost. Klaus was quietly liquidating the European assets, washing the liquid cash through a complex web of international shell corporations, and finally funneling it into the Cayman account. From there, the money was being drip-fed into the United States to fund his luxurious new life with Derek. The nursery furniture, the tailored suits, the massive legal retainers. All of it was paid for by stolen European corporate funds. Klaus was bleeding his own family company dry to play house in Chicago. DeAndre walked into the dining room, adjusting his tie before heading to his law firm. He looked over my shoulder at the cascading rows of highlighted red numbers on my monitor. "Tell me you found the kill shot," DeAndre said, his eyes scanning the millions of dollars in fraudulent transfers. "I found the entire murder weapon," I replied, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "Klaus is embezzling millions from his parent company in Berlin. He is moving the money onto American soil using Derek as a financial mule. If I send this raw data to the German authorities and the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, he is looking at decades in federal prison." DeAndre let out a low whistle. "So send it. Hit the button and let the feds drag him out of his corner office in handcuffs." I shook my head slowly, my eyes locked on the screen. "It is not that simple, DeAndre. Raw digital data can be contested. Klaus has enough money to hire a fleet of defense attorneys who will argue that this data was digitally manipulated by a disgruntled suspended employee going through a bitter divorce. They will claim I hacked his servers and altered the ledgers to frame him. It would tie the investigation up in court for years, and by then, Klaus would have fled back to Europe with Derek and the baby." "Then how do we lock him down?" DeAndre asked, pulling up a chair and sitting next to me. "I need to trap him in a lie that he cannot legally walk away from." I explained, my mind already formulating the next phase of the plan. I have his fake books, and I have his real books. But to trigger an immediate, undeniable federal indictment, I need him to officially claim these fake books are real. I need Klaus to physically sign an IRS tax declaration form, specifically the statement of specified foreign financial assets affirming these exact fraudulent numbers under penalty of perjury on United States soil. DeAndre raised an eyebrow. "You think a billionaire CEO is just going to blindly sign a federal tax declaration for you?" "He will," I said, a cold, calculating smile spreading across my face, "because he still thinks I am just a desperate woman calculating alimony. And he is about to throw himself a massive party." The massive party Klaus was throwing turned out to be the ultimate display of absolute entitlement. 2 days later, a heavy gold foil invitation arrived at my hotel front desk. Brenda and Derek were hosting a lavish baby shower. The location printed on the elegant card was my own address. They were throwing a massive celebration in my $1.5 million Lincoln Park home using my kitchen and my living room. And the ultimate insult was that Klaus had entirely funded the event using the money he had stolen from his own company. They invited me simply because they wanted an audience for my humiliation. They wanted me to stand in the corner of my own house and watch them celebrate the family they had built on my dime. I did not throw the invitation away. Instead, I walked straight to a high-end boutique on the Magnificent Mile. If I was going to attend my own public execution, I was going to dress like the executioner. I purchased a stunning emerald green silk dress that fit me perfectly paired with 4-inch designer heels. I called DeAndre and told him to put on his sharpest tailored suit. He picked me up from the hotel looking every bit the ruthless former federal agent and corporate attorney that he was. We had a job to do, and this baby shower was the perfect hunting ground. When we pulled into my neighborhood, the street was lined with expensive luxury cars. I handed my keys to a hired valet standing at the end of my driveway. As DeAndre and I walked up the front steps, I could see the sheer scale of the extravagance. Klaus had spared absolutely no expense to launder his stolen cash into domestic luxury. There were massive floral arrangements of imported white orchids flanking the doorway. Inside, a string quartet was playing softly in the corner of my living room, and waitstaff carrying trays of champagne and caviar navigated through the crowd. The room was packed with Derek's extended family and several high-ranking executives from Klaus Logistics firm. The moment DeAndre and I walked through the front door, the ambient chatter abruptly dropped. Dozens of eyes turned to stare at us. I could hear the hushed whispers rippling through the room. Look who actually showed up. Is she crazy? I cannot believe she came after what she did to him. I kept my chin high and a perfectly pleasant smile plastered on my face. I did not shrink away or look down. Brenda spotted me from across the room, and her face instantly turned sour. She marched over, her cheap perfume hitting me before she even spoke. I cannot believe you actually had the nerve to show up here, Audrey, Brenda hissed, keeping her voice low so the other guests would not hear. This day is about Derek and his baby. If you cause a scene, I will have the private security throw you out of your own house. I am just here to drop off a gift, Brenda, I replied, my voice dripping with honeyed sweetness. It would be rude to ignore such a beautiful invitation from my own husband. I walked past her, leaving her standing in the foyer with her mouth open. I navigated the room with DeAndre right by my side, acting as both my legal counsel and my absolute shield. I saw Klaus standing near the fireplace holding a crystal glass of whiskey, looking like the proud billionaire patriarch. He gave me a mocking little salute with his glass. Derek was holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by a mountain of brightly wrapped presents, resting his hands theatrically on his stomach. After an hour of enduring the whispers and the fake smiles, it was finally time for the main event. Derek settled into a plush velvet armchair that had been dragged into the center of the room. The guests gathered around, forming a large circle as Brenda began handing him the presents. He opened cashmere baby blankets, imported silver rattles, and expensive designer onesies. With every gift, he would look up and offer a glowing, tearful thank you to Klaus, who stood proudly behind him. When the pile of presents had dwindled to almost nothing, I stepped forward, breaking the circle of guests. The room went dead silent again. The string quartet even stopped playing mid-note. I have something for you, Derek, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. I reached into the oversized designer tote bag DeAndre was carrying for me. I pulled out a heavy, flat, rectangular box, wrapped in crisp, matte black paper with a silver silk ribbon. It did not look like a baby gift. It looked incredibly official and distinctly heavy. Derek looked at the box with deep suspicion. He glanced up at Klaus, who simply nodded, urging him to take it. Derek reached out with trembling hands and took the heavy black box from me, resting it awkwardly on his lap. He reached for the edge of the silver ribbon, entirely unaware that he was about to open Pandora box in front of 50 people. Derek untied the silver silk ribbon with a hesitant pull. The crisp matte black paper fell away to reveal a plain white archival storage box. He lifted the lid, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Inside, there were no hand-knitted baby booties. There were no imported silver spoons or expensive pacifiers. There was only a thick, heavy stack of legal documents neatly organized and bound with heavy-duty binder clips. The room was so quiet, I could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator running in my kitchen. Derek reached in and picked up the top packet of paper. It was the financial guarantor agreement from the fertility clinic. He stared at the dense legal text, his face going completely pale. "What is this?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly as he looked up at me. I did not answer him directly. I did not need to. Instead, I calmly reached into my clutch and pulled out my cell phone. Because this was still legally my house, my phone was seamlessly connected to the central smart home network. With a single deliberate tap on my screen, I mirrored my phone display directly to the massive 85-inch television mounted above the marble fireplace. The slideshow of Derek glowing maternity photos instantly vanished from the screen. In its place, a crisp, high-definition scan of the fertility clinic consent form appeared in bright, glaring detail towering over the entire room. Since we are all gathered here today to celebrate the creation of a new family, I said, making sure my voice carried clearly to every single guest, I thought it was only fair to acknowledge the true father. And more importantly, the true financial sponsor. I pointed toward the glowing screen. If you look closely at the bottom of that document, you will see that my name is nowhere to be found. I did not sign the parental liability waiver. Klaus did. He signed it using a corporate shell company based in Delaware. Klaus was so desperate for total control that he legally erased me from the equation months ago. Which means, Derek, I do not owe you a single penny in child support for the next 18 years. You just sued me for a baby that legally does not belong to me. Brenda let out a sharp, dramatic gasp, her hand flying to her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Derek dropped the papers back into the box, as if they were suddenly on fire. He looked desperately at Klaus, silently begging him to fix it. But Klaus was staring up at the television screen with a look of absolute paralyzed horror. But that is not even the best part of the gift. I continued, my voice perfectly steady and ruthlessly polite. I swiped my thumb across my phone screen. The image on the television immediately changed. It was now a highly detailed financial spreadsheet showing international routing numbers, SWIFT codes, and massive deposits into a Cayman Islands banking account. I slowly turned to face the group of corporate executives from Klaus Logistics Company who were standing near the catering table. Their faces had completely drained of color. "What you are looking at, gentlemen," I announced, holding their terrified gazes, "are the internal wire transfers from Horizon Ventures Limited. Klaus has not just been funding a secret domestic life here in Chicago. He has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from your German parent company. He fabricated catastrophic shipping losses, washed the stolen cash through offshore accounts, and funneled it right into this domestic medical clinic. This entire pregnancy was nothing but a brilliant front to launder dirty corporate money." The silence in the living room abruptly shattered. 50 guests erupted into chaotic whispers, gasps, and frantic shouts. The corporate executives immediately pulled out their cell phones, physically stepping away from Klaus as if he were suddenly radioactive. Brenda began crying hysterically, grabbing Derek by the arm and shaking him. The smooth, arrogant billionaire facade Klaus had worn all afternoon completely dissolved into pure panic. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He let out a guttural roar of absolute rage. Klaus lunged forward, shoving violently past two of his own colleagues. He knocked over a tall silver tray of champagne flutes, sending the crystal glasses shattering violently against the hardwood floor. "Shut it down!" Klaus screamed, his voice completely unhinged as spit flew from his lips. "She is insane. She is a jealous, hysterical woman. She hacked my private servers and fabricated this entire spreadsheet." He threw his massive frame toward the fireplace, his hands frantically clawing behind the television screen. With a violent, desperate yank, he ripped the thick black power cord straight out of the wall socket. The television screen flashed a blinding white, then went dead black. He stood there, panting heavily, clutching the severed cord, believing he had just stopped the bleeding. The television screen went dead black, but the catastrophic damage was already permanently done. Klaus stood there, clutching the severed black power cord, his chest heaving with heavy, desperate breaths. He looked like a wild animal cornered in a trap of his own making. He genuinely believed that pulling the physical plug had somehow erased the truth from the minds of the 50 people standing in my living room. But Brenda was not paralyzed by fear. She was entirely consumed by a blinding, irrational rage. She saw her son's luxurious billionaire future evaporating into thin air before her very eyes, and she desperately needed someone to punish. With a screech that sounded almost inhuman, Brenda lunged across the hardwood floor. She raised her right hand high in the air, aiming a vicious open palm slap directly at my face. She never even came close. DeAndre moved with the terrifying speed and precise control of a man who spent nearly a decade raiding federal financial criminals. He stepped smoothly in front of me, catching Brenda's bony wrist mid-air. He did not hurt her, but he locked her arm in an immovable iron grip, completely neutralizing her forward momentum. "I highly suggest you step back, Brenda," DeAndre said, his voice completely calm but carrying a lethal, unyielding edge. "Under Illinois state law, aggravated battery carries a mandatory minimum sentence. I would absolutely love to press criminal charges today and watch you try to explain to a judge why you assaulted the legal homeowner while trespassing on her property." Brenda's eyes widened in absolute shock. She tried to yank her arm back, but DeAndre held it for just a second longer to make his point perfectly clear before releasing her. She stumbled backward, retreating toward Derek, who was still sitting frozen in his velvet armchair, clutching the box of legal documents like a shield. I stepped around DeAndre and turned my attention back to the terrified crowd of guests. The corporate executives were already making their way toward the front door, desperately trying to distance themselves from the unfolding financial disaster. "Please do not leave on my account," I called out to them, projecting my voice effortlessly over the frantic whispers. "Enjoy the champagne and the imported caviar. It was paid for by embezzled German corporate funds. But you might want to call your personal defense lawyers before you go back to the office on Monday morning. Klaus is not the only one going down for this massive oversight. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission has already received a fully decrypted copy of those offshore ledgers, along with a detailed report of the Cayman Islands routing numbers." The mention of the SEC hit the room like a physical shockwave. One of the senior vice presidents actually dropped his crystal glass, letting it shatter violently against the hardwood floor. He did not even look down at the mess, he just bolted for the door. Klaus dropped the power cord. The heavy rubber cable hit the floor with a dull, lifeless thud. "The SEC," Klaus whispered, the color draining from his face so completely he looked like a walking ghost. "You called the federal government." "I am a forensic accountant, Klaus," I replied, tilting my head slightly and offering him a cold, ruthless smile. "Did you really think I was just going to complain to a family court judge about a divorce settlement? You forged medical documents. You laundered stolen corporate funds through a domestic healthcare facility. You brought a major federal financial crime right into my living room. I simply returned the favor by alerting the proper authorities." Klaus looked around the room in absolute horror. He saw his loyal executives fleeing out the front door, abandoning him entirely. He saw the wealthy, invincible lifestyle he had built in Chicago crumbling into useless ash. The absolute certainty of a federal prison sentence suddenly loomed right in front of him. In that exact moment, the charming, generous billionaire persona completely vanished. The only thing left was a desperate, selfish coward frantically looking for a human shield. Klaus turned his gaze slowly toward Derek. Derek looked up at him, his eyes wide with desperate, naive pleading. Derek truly thought Klaus was going to reassure him. He thought Klaus was going to tell him they would fight this legal battle together as a family. "This was all his idea," Klaus suddenly shouted, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at Derek. The entire room froze instantly. What Derek gasped, his voice barely a squeak. "He extorted me!" Klaus continued, his voice rising in sheer panic as he backed away from Derek, as if the pregnant man were suddenly diseased. "He found out about the offshore corporate accounts, and he threatened to expose me unless I funded his lavish lifestyle. He forced me to sign those medical guarantor forms. He demanded the luxury cars, the expensive furniture, and this ridiculous baby shower. I was just trying to protect my company from his ruthless blackmail." Derek sat completely paralyzed, the heavy white box resting on his lap. The man he had destroyed his marriage for, the man who was supposed to give him a billionaire lifestyle, had just thrown him entirely under the bus, without a single second of hesitation. Klaus was actively framing his pregnant partner for federal extortion just to save his own skin. Derek looked at me, his eyes welling with absolute terror, as he finally realized the magnitude of his catastrophic mistake. As the front door slammed shut behind the last fleeing executive, Klaus did not hesitate. He did not look back at Derek or apologize for framing him. He turned on his heel and sprinted out of my house, desperate to get to his lawyers before the federal authorities froze his passport. In less than 2 minutes, the lavish baby shower had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but shattered crystal, scattered gift wrap, and the suffocating silence of absolute ruin. Derek was still sitting in the velvet armchair. His hands were shaking so violently that the archival storage box slipped off his lap, spilling the medical records across the hardwood floor. Brenda stood behind him, her face a mask of pale, twitching shock. She looked at the door Klaus had just run through, then looked back at me. Derek finally found his voice. It was not the arrogant, confident tone he had used at the mediation table. It was a high-pitched, desperate shriek. "You cannot do this to me, Audrey!" Derek screamed, tears of genuine panic streaming down his face. "He is gone. Klaus is gone. I have nothing left. You are my wife. You are supposed to take care of me." I stood my ground, my expression completely unchanged. "I am your soon-to-be ex-wife," I corrected him. "And I am entirely finished taking care of a parasite. Pack whatever fits in a single suitcase and get out of my house." The sheer panic in Derek's eyes suddenly morphed into a wild, cornered fury. The desperate victim act vanished, replaced by the greedy entitlement that had always been lurking just beneath the surface. He gripped the armrests of the chair and pulled himself up, thrusting his pregnant belly forward like a shield. "I am not going anywhere!" Derek shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You cannot kick me out! I do not care what happened with Klaus or the SEC. This house is marital property. We live in Illinois. You bought this house while we were together, and under the law, I am entitled to half of its value. We went to mediation. The family court judge gave me temporary exclusive rights to this property until the baby is born. You are the one who has to leave." Brenda instantly rallied behind her son, her confidence returning now that they were back on familiar legal ground. "He is absolutely right," she snapped, crossing her arms defiantly. "You signed the mediation agreement. You surrendered the house. We are calling the police to have you removed for violating a court order right now." I did not say a word. I simply took a step back and looked at DeAndre. DeAndre let out a low, amused chuckle. He walked to the marble kitchen island and set his leather briefcase down. The sharp click of the brass latches opening sounded like a gun cocking in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper bearing the official red seal of the Cook County Sheriff Office. DeAndre walked deliberately across the room and held the paper out to Derek. Derek refused to take it, so DeAndre simply let it drop. It fluttered down and landed squarely on Derek's chest before sliding to the floor. "What is this?" Derek demanded, refusing to look down at it. "That is an immediate 24-hour notice of eviction," DeAndre said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of sympathy. Derek let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You are a terrible lawyer, DeAndre. You cannot evict a spouse from a primary marital residence. Family court already ruled on this. That piece of paper is completely worthless." DeAndre smiled. It was the terrifying, predatory smile of a man who had already won the chess match 10 moves ago. "You are absolutely right about family court," DeAndre said smoothly. "A family court judge did give you temporary rights to the marital property. The problem is, this house is not marital property. In fact, Audrey does not even own this house." Derek stopped laughing. He stared at DeAndre, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about? Of course she owns it. She pays the mortgage. She pays a lease," DeAndre corrected him, enjoying every single second of the revelation. 3 years ago, before you even got married, I advised Audrey to protect her assets. We transferred the entire property into an irrevocable trust. The trust is owned by a private corporate entity managed by my wife, Jasmine. Audrey is simply a tenant with a lifetime lease. You are not a spouse claiming half of a marital asset. You are an unauthorized subtenant trespassing on corporate property. Derek's jaw actually dropped. He looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror, as the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The mediation agreement he had so proudly weaponized was entirely null and void. The family court had zero jurisdiction over a corporate trust. He had spent months plotting to steal a house that had never actually belonged to me in the first place. Derek stared at the official county seal on the paper resting near his feet as if it were a venomous snake. His brain was desperately trying to process the magnitude of the trap he had just walked into. The luxurious remnants of the baby shower surrounded him. Torn wrapping paper and shattered crystal glasses littered the floor, serving as the perfect backdrop for his complete financial ruin. Brenda refused to accept defeat. She marched up to DeAndre, her face flushed red with indignant fury. Her cheap perfume mixed unpleasantly with the smell of spilled champagne. "That is a complete bluff," Brenda spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at DeAndre's chest. "You cannot just magically erase a house from a marriage. My son lived here for 4 years. He has legal rights. He signed the mortgage documents with her. I saw the paperwork with my own 2 eyes." DeAndre let out a slow, deliberate breath, clearly enjoying the opportunity to dismantle her completely. He did not back away. "You saw exactly what Audrey wanted you to see, Brenda. 4 years ago, when Audrey first told me she was going to marry your son, I did a comprehensive background check on him. Call it professional paranoia. I saw his terrible credit score. I saw his massive revolving credit card debt. And as her attorney, I advised my sister-in-law to build an impenetrable financial fortress before she ever walked down the aisle." DeAndre stepped around the marble kitchen island, his tall frame towering over Derek, who was still frozen in the velvet armchair. "An irrevocable trust." DeAndre explained, his voice echoing loudly in the silent living room, is exactly what it sounds like. It cannot be altered, amended, or revoked by a family court judge. Before the wedding, Audrey legally transferred the entire deed of this property to a private holding company. My wife Jasmine is the sole managing director of that corporate entity. Audrey does not actually own this real estate. She simply holds a lifetime lease as a standard tenant. Derek's face was completely ashen, devoid of any color. "But I signed the mortgage," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. "I signed the thick stack of paperwork at the closing table when we refinanced the house 2 years ago. I am on the deed." "You did not sign a mortgage?" DeAndre corrected him, delivering the final crushing blow with surgical precision. "You signed a standard residential lease agreement that was expertly bound in the exact middle of the administrative packet. The holding company allowed you to live here as an authorized occupant, paying a small portion of the monthly maintenance fees. You were essentially paying rent, Derek. You own exactly 0% equity in this property. You do not own a single brick of this house." The sheer brilliance of the legal maneuver hit Derek like a physical train. The $15,000 a month in permanent spousal support he had demanded was entirely based on the massive assumed value of the marital estate, but the estate was practically empty. The house was legally untouchable, and the millions of dollars he thought he was going to get from Klaus were now tied up in a massive federal embezzlement investigation. "You set me up," Derek gasped, looking up at me with tears of absolute defeat streaming down his cheeks. "You planned this from the very beginning." "I protected myself from the very beginning," I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. "I loved you, Derek. I would have given you the world if you had just been honest with me. But you decided to view my hard-earned bank accounts as your personal piggy bank. You decided to carry another man's child and trick me into funding a lifetime of luxury. You set yourself up. I just let you walk into the cage and lock the door yourself." Brenda crossed her arms tightly, her jaw set in stubborn, desperate defiance. "Well, we are not leaving tonight. You can waive all the fancy legal papers you want, but the law says you have to give us 30 days to vacate a residence. We are staying right here, and we will take this up with the judge on Monday morning." DeAndre checked his heavy stainless steel watch. He looked completely unbothered by her empty threat. Actually, Brenda, 30-day eviction laws apply to lawful tenants who have established legal residency. But remember, that 911 call you two made a few nights ago. Derek visibly flinched at the mention of the police. You filed a false police report to have Audrey temporarily removed from the property. DeAndre continued, his tone turning razor sharp. Because you actively committed fraud to gain exclusive access to the property, the holding company immediately revoked your status as an authorized occupant. You are no longer a tenant, Derek. As of this exact moment, you are both legally classified as hostile trespassers on private corporate property. Before Brenda could even open her mouth to argue, a series of bright flashing red and blue lights swept violently across the large bay windows of the living room. The heavy, authoritative sound of car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. I called the precinct an hour ago, DeAndre said, picking up his leather briefcase and snapping the brass latches shut. I informed them that two unauthorized individuals, one of whom is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud conspiracy, were trespassing at this address and refusing to leave. Heavy, loud footsteps sounded on the front porch. A sharp, commanding knock rattled the heavy oak front door. Derek let out a loud, terrified sob, clutching his stomach, while Brenda stared at the door in absolute, paralyzed horror. DeAndre walked over and pulled open the heavy oak front door. Two uniformed Chicago police officers stood on the porch, their radios crackling softly in the crisp night air. They stepped into the foyer, taking in the chaotic scene of the ruined baby shower. The shattered crystal and torn wrapping paper made the luxurious living room look like the aftermath of a localized hurricane. Good evening, officers, DeAndre said, his voice the epitome of calm, cooperative professionalism. He handed them the thick leather-bound folder containing the corporate trust documents and the officially revoked occupancy agreement. I am the legal counsel for the corporate entity that owns this property. The two individuals standing over there are unauthorized trespassers. They were previously allowed to stay as guests, but their occupancy status has been permanently revoked due to fraudulent activity. We need them escorted off the premises immediately. The older officer adjusted his utility belt and spent a full minute reviewing the documents. He checked the corporate seal, verified Jasmine's signature as the managing director, and nodded. It was completely ironclad. Family court disputes were messy civil matters, but corporate trespassing with a revoked lease was a straightforward criminal issue. The officer turned his attention to Derek and Brenda. You folks have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal clothing and hygiene items, he announced, his voice booming with authority. After that, you are vacating the property. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, you will be placed in handcuffs and charged with criminal trespassing. Brenda let out a high-pitched wail. 10 minutes, she shrieked, waving her arms frantically around the room. Are you out of your mind? We have thousands of dollars worth of baby furniture in the nursery. We have imported cribs and designer strollers. We cannot possibly pack all of that in 10 minutes. DeAndre stepped forward, his expression completely unreadable. Everything purchased for the nursery was bought using a fraudulent credit card transaction, or funded by Klaus' embezzled corporate money, he stated flatly. It is all considered evidence in the ongoing federal investigation. You are not taking a single piece of furniture out of this house, personal clothing only. Derek let out another broken sob. He slowly pulled himself out of the velvet armchair, moving like a man walking to his own execution. He trudged toward the stairs, defeated. But Brenda completely lost her grip on reality. She rushed into the kitchen, violently yanking open cabinets. When she realized she had no expensive luggage to pack her things into, DeAndre calmly opened the pantry door. He pulled out a roll of heavy-duty black plastic contractor garbage bags and tossed them onto the marble counter. Use these, DeAndre said. Brenda stared at the black plastic bags as if he had just handed her a live grenade. The ultimate indignity. The woman who had spent the entire afternoon sipping expensive champagne and boasting about her son-billionaire lifestyle was now being forced to stuff her cheap polyester blouses into literal trash bags, under the watchful eyes of the Chicago police. She grabbed a bag and began frantically shoving her belongings inside her hands, shaking violently. But the sheer humiliation of the moment finally broke her. She dropped the half-filled garbage bag onto the hardwood floor and turned toward me. The arrogant, condescending monster who had tormented me on the phone just days ago vanished. In her place was a pathetic, terrified woman desperate for a lifeline. Brenda practically threw herself across the kitchen, stopping just inches from where I stood. Tears were streaming down her heavily made-up face, leaving thick black streaks of mascara on her cheeks. "Audrey, please!" Brenda begged, her voice cracking, as she clasped her hands together in a gesture of frantic prayer. "You cannot let them do this to us. Please! We are family. You loved Derek. He is carrying a child. You cannot just throw a pregnant man and his mother out into the cold night like stray dogs. Think about the baby. Have some compassion. Where are your family values?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression as cold and unyielding as a glacier. Yesterday morning, on a recorded phone call, I reminded her, my voice perfectly steady. "You told me that I should be grateful Derek was enduring this pregnancy. You told me that this house rightfully belonged to the child, and that I was nothing but a temporary bank account." Brenda swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously as her own cruel words were weaponized against her. "Well, Brenda," I continued, tilting my head slightly, "you said the house belongs to the child. Too bad neither belonged to me." The older police officer stepped forward, placing a firm, commanding hand on Brenda's shoulder. "Time is up, ma'am," he said sternly. "Grab your bags. We are leaving." Derek came slowly down the stairs, awkwardly carrying 2 stuffed black garbage bags over his shoulder. He was frantically dialing a number on his cell phone with his free hand. He put the phone on speaker, desperate for a savior. But the only sound that echoed through the quiet room was the automated voice of Klaus' voicemail. As the officers escorted them out the front door and onto the chilly concrete porch, a loud, aggressive roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet neighborhood street. Through the large bay window, we all saw it. Klaus had not just run out of the house to make a panicked phone call. He had run straight to his silver Mercedes parked down the block. The heavy tires squealed violently against the asphalt, leaving thick black skid marks as Klaus peeled away from the curb. He did not stop to pick up Derek. He did not roll down the window to offer a word of comfort. Klaus was speeding off into the night, racing straight toward the international airport to catch the first available flight back to Berlin, leaving his pregnant lover stranded on the sidewalk with nothing but 2 bags of garbage. While Derek and Brenda were being humiliated on my front porch, Klaus was executing what he thought was a flawless escape plan. He drove his silver Mercedes erratically down the Kennedy Expressway, pushing the high-performance engine well past the legal speed limit. His heart hammered in his chest as he constantly checked his rearview mirror, terrified that flashing blue lights would suddenly appear out of the darkness. He pulled into the drop-off lane at Terminal 5 of O'Hare International Airport, practically abandoning his expensive car with the valet. He did not care about the vehicle. It was just another asset purchased with stolen money. All that mattered was getting onto European soil, where his wealth and connections could shield him from the United States justice system. Klaus practically sprinted through the sliding glass doors, clutching his German passport. He bypassed the economy lines entirely, moving straight toward the exclusive first-class check-in counter for his international carrier. He was sweating profusely, his expensive Italian suit now wrinkled and damp. The ticket agent, a woman with a perfectly calm demeanor, smiled at him as he slammed his passport onto the counter. "I need to get on the next available flight to Berlin," Klaus demanded, his heavy German accent thick with panic. "I do not care about the cost. Put me in first class." The agent typed a few keys on her computer, glancing up at him. "Sir, the last direct flight to Berlin departed an hour ago. However, we have a flight to Frankfurt boarding in 20 minutes. I can secure a seat for you there, but the last-minute first-class fare will be $8,000. Do it." Klaus snapped, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his sleek black corporate credit card. "Charge it and give me the boarding pass. I need to get through security right now." The agent swiped the card. A few agonizing seconds ticked by as the system processed the transaction. Then the machine let out a sharp, negative beep. "I am sorry, sir," the agent said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "This card has been declined." Klaus slammed his fist against the counter, startling the agent. "That is impossible. Try it again." She swiped it again. Another negative beep. Klaus cursed loudly in German. He pulled out a personal platinum card and shoved it across the desk. The agent swiped the second card. Declined. He threw a third card at her. Declined. Klaus felt a cold, paralyzing dread wash over him. He did not know that less than an hour ago the Securities and Exchange Commission, acting on the detailed decrypted financial ledger I had provided, had secured an emergency federal injunction freezing every single domestic and offshore account tied to his name and his shell companies. His massive empire had been completely locked down. "I will pay in cash," Klaus yelled, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a thick wad of $100 bills he kept for emergencies. "Just print the damn ticket." The agent, now clearly unnerved by his erratic behavior, quickly processed the cash transaction and handed him a paper boarding pass. Klaus snatched it from her hand and sprinted toward the priority TSA checkpoint. The security line for first-class passengers was relatively short. Klaus practically shoved his way to the front, ignoring the indignant protests of the people he bypassed. He slapped his passport and boarding pass down on the podium in front of the TSA agent. "Just let me through." Klaus breathed heavily, constantly glancing over his shoulder toward the terminal entrance. The TSA agent placed the boarding pass on the digital scanner. Instead of the familiar green approval light, the scanner screen flashed violently in bright, solid red. A loud, continuous alarm tone began emitting from the machine. "Sir," the TSA agent said, his voice dropping into a stern, authoritative tone as he stepped out from behind the podium, blocking Klaus' path. "I am going to need you to step to the side." "There is no time," Klaus shouted, trying to push past the agent. "My flight is boarding." Before Klaus could take another step, two tall men wearing plain dark suits and earpieces stepped out from a nearby security office. They moved with absolute synchronized precision, flanking Klaus on both sides. "Klaus," one of the men said, pulling out a leather badge case and flipping it open to reveal the gold crest of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "I am Special Agent Miller with the White Collar Crime Division. We have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding massive corporate fraud and international money laundering." Klaus stared at the FBI badges in absolute stunned disbelief. "How did you know I was here?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Agent Miller offered a cold, professional smile as he pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Let us just say an anonymous concerned citizen provided us with a very detailed tip, including your exact corporate credit card numbers and the likelihood that you would attempt to flee jurisdiction tonight. Put your hands behind your back." Klaus was practically dragged out of O'Hare International Airport in handcuffs, his expensive Italian suit completely ruined, as federal agents pushed him into the back of an unmarked black SUV. Within an hour, he was sitting in a freezing, windowless interrogation room at the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. Klaus tried to regain his arrogant billionaire composure. He leaned back in the metal chair, his handcuffed wrists resting on the scarred table. When Special Agent Miller finally walked into the room, Klaus immediately went on the offensive. He demanded to speak to the German consulate. He threatened to have Miller fired. He loudly claimed absolute corporate immunity, stating that his logistics company was headquartered in Berlin and fell outside of United States jurisdiction. Agent Miller did not look intimidated. He did not yell or bang his fists on the table. He simply sat down, opened a thick manila folder, and began laying out crisp white sheets of paper, one by one. Klaus looked down, expecting to see vague financial allegations. Instead, all the color instantly drained from his face. He was looking at exact line-by-line printouts of his highly classified offshore ledgers. We have the internal SWIFT codes, Klaus, the agent said, his voice completely calm. We have the exact routing numbers from the Cayman Islands shell company, Horizon Ventures Limited. We also have the fraudulent medical guarantor forms you signed to launder the money through a Chicago fertility clinic. Corporate immunity does not cover federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and tax evasion committed on American soil. You are looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal prison. The illusion of invincibility shattered completely. Klaus realized the anonymous tip was not just a disgruntled employee making wild guesses. Audrey had completely decrypted his deepest, darkest financial secrets and handed the federal government a perfectly gift-wrapped conviction. The SEC had already frozen his accounts. His parent company in Germany was probably being raided by European authorities at this exact moment. He had absolutely no way out. But Klaus was a survivor. He was a ruthless corporate shark who had climbed to the top of the logistics world by crushing anyone who got in his way. If the ship was sinking, he was not going to drown alone. "I want a plea deal," Klaus whispered, his heavy accent trembling as he leaned frantically across the metal table. "I will tell you exactly how the domestic money laundering operation was orchestrated, but I need a guarantee of reduced sentencing and immediate extradition to Germany." Agent Miller leaned back, crossing his arms. "I am listening." Klaus took a deep, shaky breath and began to spin the most desperate, venomous lie of his entire life. He completely threw his pregnant lover to the wolves. "I did not mastermind the domestic laundering," Klaus insisted, his voice rising with fake desperation. "It was Derek. He is a financial parasite. We were having a brief, meaningless affair. Somehow he gained access to my private laptop while I was sleeping and found the offshore accounts. He saw the Cayman Islands transfers and he blackmailed me." Agent Miller raised an eyebrow, picking up his pen. "Blackmailed you?" "Yes." Klaus nodded frantically. "Derek threatened to send the files to the SEC and ruin my company unless I funded his lavish lifestyle. He forced me to sign those medical documents. He forced me to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for his in vitro fertilization treatments. He demanded luxury cars, expensive furniture, and cash transfers to keep his mouth shut. I was a victim of severe extortion. He was the mastermind pulling the strings in Chicago. It was a brilliant, disgusting strategy. Klaus knew Derek had no money, no powerful lawyers, and absolutely no way to defend himself against the crushing weight of the federal government. By framing Derek as the mastermind of the domestic extortion ring, Klaus hoped to reduce his own culpability and secure a lighter sentence. Agent Miller wrote everything down, his expression completely unreadable. He asked Klaus a series of rapid-fire questions about Derek's involvement, the joint bank accounts, and the specific dates of the wire transfers. Klaus answered every single one, weaving a complex web of lies that placed the entire burden of guilt squarely onto Derek's shoulders. After 2 grueling hours, Agent Miller closed his notepad and stood up. He left Klaus sitting alone in the freezing interrogation room. By sunrise the next morning, the sworn statement Klaus provided had been rushed to a federal judge. The judge reviewed the staggering amount of financial evidence paired with the direct testimony of the logistics CEO. Without a single moment of hesitation, the judge signed the official paperwork. Before Derek even had the chance to unpack his garbage bags at a cheap roadside motel, a federal arrest warrant was officially issued. Derek was no longer just a cheating husband fighting an eviction notice. He was now a prime suspect wanted by the FBI for felony wire fraud, conspiracy, and international extortion. I would later learn exactly how Derek spent his final hours of freedom before the federal marshals closed in. While I was sleeping soundly in my quiet hotel suite, Derek and Brenda were sitting in a dingy $30 a night roadside motel on the absolute outskirts of Chicago. The neon sign outside their window flickered wildly, casting a sickly red glow through the thin, stained curtains of room 112. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial bleach. It was a massive, humiliating fall from the heated floors and imported lavender diffusers of my Lincoln Park home. Brenda was pacing the narrow, filthy carpet between the sagging mattress and the scuffed dresser, muttering bitterly to herself as she rummaged through her black plastic garbage bags. Derek was sitting on the edge of the bed, trembling violently. He knew Klaus had abandoned him. He knew the extravagant baby shower had ended in absolute ruin. But Derek still clung to one final, desperate shred of hope. He thought he still possessed a secret financial weapon. Weeks before the party, Klaus had given Derek a secondary corporate debit card tied directly to the Cayman Islands Shell Company. Millions of dollars were supposed to be sitting safely in that digital offshore vault. Derek opened his laptop, the bright screen illuminating his pale, terrified face in the dark motel room. He desperately searched for the most aggressive, high-profile criminal defense attorneys in the city. He found a massive downtown firm that specialized in federal white-collar crime and navigated directly to their urgent emergency retainer portal. The required initial deposit was $50,000 just to secure a morning consultation. Derek did not hesitate. He typed in the offshore routing numbers, the account details, and the secondary authorization code Klaus had provided. He clicked submit, holding his breath as he waited for the comforting green confirmation screen. The loading icon spun for 5 agonizing seconds. Then a bold red error message flashed aggressively across the display. Transaction declined. Account suspended. Derek's heart slammed against his ribs. He convinced himself he had simply mistyped the numbers in his panic. His shaking fingers re-entered the routing information, triple-checking every single digit. He clicked submit again. Declined. A cold, suffocating panic began to claw at his throat. He picked up his cell phone and dialed the international customer service number for the offshore banking institution. After navigating a maze of automated prompts, a representative with a crisp, British accent answered the line. Derek demanded the transfer be forced through immediately, frantically, citing his authorization code. The representative paused, the sound of loud typing echoing over the line. "I apologize, sir," the representative said, their tone shifting into cold, unyielding corporate protocol. "But this entire account, along with all associated corporate shell entities, was completely frozen by a joint federal injunction several hours ago. The United States Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission have seized total control of the assets pending a massive criminal investigation. There are 0 available funds." Derek dropped the phone. It clattered sharply against the cheap laminate flooring. The millions of dollars were entirely gone. He was stranded in a cheap motel with a pregnant belly and a mother who had nothing but garbage bags. Just as the crushing, suffocating reality set in, the local morning news began playing on the small, static-filled television mounted in the corner of the room. The breaking news graphic flashed boldly across the screen. Prominent logistics CEO arrested at O'Hare Airport. The anchor detailed the massive international embezzlement ring and then delivered the final fatal blow. A federal arrest warrant has also been officially issued for his domestic accomplice Derek on charges of wire fraud conspiracy and international extortion. When the news anchor mentioned his name, Brenda let out a horrified shriek, dropping a handful of wrinkled clothes onto the floor. "You told me Klaus had this under control," she screamed, backing away from her own son as if he were radioactive. Klaus had completely framed him as the mastermind. The FBI was actively hunting him down. In a state of absolute mindless terror, Derek reached for the only lifeline he had left. The woman whose life he had spent the last 2 years trying to systematically destroy. I was sitting in DeAndre's kitchen drinking a warm cup of coffee and watching the sunrise when my phone vibrated on the marble counter. It was Derek. I answered it, putting it squarely on speakerphone so DeAndre could hear. Audrey, Derek sobbed, his voice breaking into a hysterical, pathetic wail the second the line connected. "They issued a warrant. Klaus blamed me for everything. They are going to arrest me. I am completely broke. The accounts are completely frozen. Please, Audrey, I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have to pay for a lawyer for me. You cannot let me go to federal prison. I am pregnant. I am carrying a piece of your history. We wanted this family together. You cannot just abandon me. I sat perfectly still on one of the high back bar stools in DeAndre Modern Kitchen, holding my warm mug of coffee with both hands. The morning sun was just starting to stream through the large windows, casting a peaceful golden light across the marble countertops. On the surface of the island, my phone sat on speakerphone, projecting the pathetic echoing sounds of Derek's absolute desperation. DeAndre stood across from me, leaning against the sink, with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, professional disgust. Derek was hyperventilating on the other end of the line, his breath catching in ragged, ugly sobs. "Audrey, please," he begged, his voice cracking violently. "You have to wire me the $50,000 for the retainer. Just 50,000. That is nothing to you. You can pull it from your retirement fund. You can take out a loan. I am the father of the child we plan to raise. You cannot let them put a pregnant man in a federal holding cell. They will destroy me in there." I just let him talk, letting him expose the absolute depths of his terrifying selfishness. Even now, facing decades in federal prison, his only instinct was to demand that I empty my own retirement accounts to save him from the consequences of his massive betrayal. When I did not immediately respond, Derek abruptly changed his tactics. The desperate begging seamlessly shifted back into the toxic, manipulative gaslighting he had relied on for the past 2 years. "You are doing this on purpose," Derek accused, his voice taking on a sudden sharp edge of hysterical anger. "You are intentionally dragging this out to punish me because your ego got bruised. Do you have any idea what this stress is doing to my body? My blood pressure is skyrocketing. If I lose this baby because you are too stubborn to pay for a defense attorney, the blood is entirely on your hands, Audrey. I was just a victim. Klaus manipulated me. He used his wealth and his power to trap me into an affair, and I only went along with it because I thought he could give our baby a better life. I was doing all of this for us, for our family." He was actively trying to rewrite history, painting his elaborate, calculated extortion and wire fraud as a noble sacrifice he had made for my sole benefit. I slowly set my coffee mug down on the marble counter. The ceramic made a sharp, definitive clink in the quiet kitchen. "Derek," I said, my voice completely devoid of anger, pity, or any trace of the love I once held for him. "Stop talking." The sudden icy command cut through his hysterical rambling. The line fell silent save for his heavy, ragged breathing and the faint sound of Brenda crying in the background of the motel room. "You were not manipulated by Klaus." I continued, enunciating every single word with lethal precision. "You willingly conspired with him to embezzle millions of dollars. You forged legal medical documents to erase my parental rights so you could steal my money through child support. You faked a panic attack in a restaurant lobby. You filed a false police report to steal my house. You spent my hard-earned salary on designer clothes while carrying another man-child. You did not do a single piece of this for our family. You did it entirely for yourself." But Audrey, Derek whimpered, the manufactured anger instantly collapsing back into pathetic pleading. "The baby. You promised to love this baby. I promised to love my child." I corrected him, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. "That child belongs to a German billionaire who is currently sitting in federal custody because he threw you to the wolves to save his own skin. You wanted his money so badly, Derek. Now you get to share his prison sentence." "Audrey, please." Derek screamed, the sound of sheer, unadulterated terror ripping through the speaker. "I have nothing. I am completely bankrupt. You are the only asset I have left. You have to protect me." I leaned forward, bringing my face just inches from the microphone of my phone. "I am a forensic accountant, Derek. I only invest in assets with a return. You are a massive liability." Before Derek could even process the absolute finality of my words, a massive explosive crash erupted through the phone speaker. It sounded like a bomb detonating in his tiny motel room. "Federal agents," a deep booming voice roared over the line, completely drowning out Derek's sudden terrified scream. "Nobody move. Show me your hands right now. Get down on the ground." I could hear the chaotic sounds of heavy combat boots storming across the cheap laminate flooring, the violent clatter of furniture being kicked out of the way, and Brenda shrieking hysterically at the top of her lungs. The United States Marshals Service had just breached the door of room 112. I did not stay on the line to listen to them put my husband in handcuffs. I simply reached out with one finger and tapped the red button on my screen. The call disconnected instantly, plunging DeAndre Kitchen back into a perfect, peaceful silence. I picked up my coffee mug, took a slow sip, and smiled. 6 months passed since the morning the federal marshals kicked down the door of room 112. A lot can change in half a year when you let the federal government do the heavy lifting for you. Klaus never even made it to trial in the United States. The German authorities moved with ruthless efficiency, securing his immediate extradition. He was officially stripped of his chief executive officer title. His global assets were entirely liquidated to compensate his parent company, and he is currently sitting in a cold maximum security holding cell in Berlin, awaiting trial for international corporate embezzlement. He never once called to ask about the baby. Derek experienced a very different kind of downfall. He gave birth 2 months ago, while confined under strict federal house arrest. Without Klaus' stolen millions, or my forensic accounting salary to support his lavish lifestyle, Brenda was forced to move them both into a tiny state, subsidized apartment on the far south side of the city. But today was not about Brenda or the baby. Today was Derek's official federal sentencing hearing at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago. I did not walk into that courtroom looking like a broken, betrayed wife. I walked through the heavy oak double doors wearing a custom-tailored, razor-sharp crimson suit that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. My hair was perfectly styled, and my posture was completely unyielding. DeAndre walked right beside me, projecting the terrifying confidence of a seasoned attorney who already knew the verdict before the judge even spoke. When I took my seat behind the prosecution table, Derek turned around from the defense stand. He looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant, glowing man who had smirked at me from behind a restaurant table was completely gone. He wore an oversized, ill-fitting gray suit that hung awkwardly on his frame. His face was pale, his eyes surrounded by deep, dark circles of pure exhaustion and terror. He looked at me silently, begging for a shred of the mercy he had so casually denied me. I simply offered him a polite, icy smile and broke eye contact. I was not called to the witness stand to cry about my broken marriage or detail the emotional trauma of his betrayal. The federal prosecutor called me forward as an expert financial witness for the United States government. I sat in the polished wooden witness box, swore an oath to tell the absolute truth, and proceeded to clinically dismantle his entire existence. For 2 straight hours, I walked the judge and the courtroom through the exact digital footprint of the Cayman Islands Shell Company. I displayed the decrypted ledgers on the massive courtroom monitors. I explained exactly how Derek knowingly utilized embezzled corporate funds to pay for his medical procedures, his designer wardrobe, and his high-end legal retainers. I presented the forged medical guarantor documents, not as a messy domestic family dispute, but as clear, undeniable evidence of a sophisticated wire fraud conspiracy. Derek, defense attorney, frantically tried to paint him as a naive, manipulated victim who was blinded by the wealth of a powerful billionaire. But my raw data was completely irrefutable. I pointed out the exact timestamps where Derek personally authorized illicit wire transfers. Numbers do not possess emotions. They do not gaslight, and they certainly do not lie. I spoke with the calm, devastating authority of a woman who had meticulously mapped out her enemy destruction down to the final decimal point. After the closing arguments concluded, the federal judge adjusted his silver glasses and looked down from the high mahogany bench. The entire courtroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The judge addressed Derek directly, his voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. He condemned Derek for manipulating the medical system and conspiring to launder stolen international funds. He formally sentenced Derek to 36 months in a minimum security federal correctional facility, to be followed by 5 years of heavily monitored financial probation. Derek collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, burying his face in his hands as loud, wretched sobs tore through his chest. I could hear Brenda wailing loudly from the back row of the public gallery, but the court bailiff immediately ordered her to remain silent or face forced ejection. But the criminal prison sentence was not the final blow. The judge picked up the original family court divorce petition that Derek had so arrogantly filed months ago. The two legal matters had been deeply intertwined by the fraud. Due to the extensive documented financial fraud surrounding the conception and monetary sponsorship of this pregnancy, the judge announced, his voice ringing clearly through the silent room. This court finds the defendant claims of marital support to be entirely fraudulent and legally void. I hereby officially strip the defendant of any right to seek alimony, spousal maintenance, or child support from the petitioner, Audrey. You are completely and permanently financially severed. With Derek officially sentenced and my financial assets entirely protected by the federal court, the heavy anchor I had been dragging for 4 years was finally cut loose. I did not throw a wild party to celebrate my victory. I simply went back to doing what I do best. I focused entirely on building my own empire. To mark the beginning of my new life, I decided to treat myself to something I had delayed buying for years because I was too busy funding Derek and his endless fertility treatments. I purchased a brand new custom-ordered midnight black luxury sedan. It was the exact high-end model Derek used to obsess over when he thought he was going to be living a billionaire lifestyle. It was a crisp, overcast Tuesday morning about a month after the federal sentencing hearing. I had an early morning consultation with a prospective client on the far south side of the city. I was driving back toward downtown Chicago when I realized I needed a strong cup of coffee. I pulled off the main highway and navigated into the drive-through lane of a generic, brightly lit fast food chain. I rolled down my tinted window, enjoying the smell of the fresh leather interior, and placed my order through the crackling speaker box. A tired, monotone voice read my total back to me and told me to pull forward to the second window. I eased my new car forward, the quiet engine purring smoothly as I stopped beside the pickup window. The sliding glass pane jerked open. I reached out with my platinum credit card, expecting to see a random teenager working the morning shift. Instead, I found myself staring directly into the deeply exhausted, completely defeated eyes of my former mother-in-law. Brenda was wearing a deeply unflattering polyester maroon uniform polo shirt that was stained with old coffee and fryer grease. A cheap plastic name tag was pinned crookedly to her chest. Her hair, which she used to spend hundreds of dollars getting professionally styled every week, was pulled back into a messy, frizzy ponytail hidden beneath a corporate visor. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her screaming on my front porch. Without Klaus and his stolen millions, or my forensic accounting salary to support them, Brenda had been forced into absolute survival mode. Derek was sitting in a federal prison generating zero income, and his massive legal fees still needed to be paid. Brenda had to take a minimum wage job just to keep the lights on in their tiny, subsidized apartment and put money into Derek and his prison commissary account. When Brenda looked down and realized who was sitting in the driver's seat of the $100,000 car, her face instantly drained of all color. She stared at my flawless tailored suit, the expensive watch on my wrist, and the pristine leather interior of my new vehicle. The stark, undeniable contrast between my massive success and her crushing poverty was fully illuminated in the harsh fluorescent light of the drive-through window. Brenda tried to summon the old, arrogant sneer she used to wear like a weapon. She pulled her shoulders back, her jaw tightening defensively as if she was preparing to spit a venomous insult at me. But she simply did not have the energy left to fight. The heavy, suffocating weight of her new reality had completely broken her spirit. "I am not serving you," Brenda hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound humiliation and lingering resentment. I looked at her, my expression completely neutral. I did not gloat. I did not laugh at her fast food uniform or mock her terrible living situation. I did not need to. Her current reality was a much harsher punishment than anything I could ever say. "It is just a black coffee, Brenda," I said evenly, holding out my sleek metal credit card. "Ring it up." Brenda stared at my card for a long, agonizing second. She knew that if she refused to serve a paying customer, her manager would likely fire her on the spot, and she desperately needed this miserable job. Her shoulders slumped forward in absolute defeat. She took my card with shaking hands, swiped it through the register, and handed it back to me, along with a large paper cup of hot coffee. As I took the cup, I reached into the center console of my car and pulled out a crisp, folded $100 bill. I had written a very short message on a small sticky note and wrapped the cash around it. I held the money out to her. Brenda looked at the $100 bill as if it were a physical trap. She hesitated, her pride warring against her desperate need for cash. Finally, she snatched the money from my hand. I rolled my window up, put my car in drive, and smoothly pulled away from the fast food restaurant. I checked my rearview mirror as I merged back onto the main road. Through the glass of the drive-through window, I watched Brenda unfold the crisp $100 bill. She read the 3 simple words I had written on the yellow sticky note: "For the baby." In that exact moment, the complete devastating magnitude of her massive loss finally crashed down on her. If she had just been a decent mother-in-law, if Derek had just been an honest husband, they would not be sitting in ruin. Derek would be living in a beautiful Lincoln Park home, and she would be a proud grandmother, with a wealthy family. Her blind greed had cost her son an entire life of absolute luxury. Brenda crumpled the $100 bill in her fist, covered her face with her grease-stained hands, and began to cry hysterically right in the middle of the drive-through window. I drove my new midnight black luxury sedan away from the fast food restaurant, leaving the miserable remnants of my past in the rearview mirror. I merged onto the expressway and headed straight into the towering steel and glass heart of the downtown Chicago financial district. It was time to tie up the very last loose thread of the life I was leaving behind. I pulled into the private executive parking garage of the accounting firm that had suspended me just 6 months ago. The same firm that had blindly taken the word of an arrogant billionaire over my flawless professional record. When I walked through the revolving glass doors of the main lobby, the atmosphere was entirely different. The security guard who had confiscated my badge months ago practically tripped over himself to greet me, buzzing me through the turnstiles with a nervous, apologetic smile. I took the elevator to the top floor where the senior management offices were located. I did not have to wait in the reception area. The managing partner, Mr. Harrison, was already standing outside his corner office waiting for me with a forced, overly enthusiastic smile. He ushered me into the massive glass-walled boardroom. The entire senior executive committee was sitting around the long mahogany table. When I walked in, they actually stood up to greet me. It was a staggering display of corporate groveling. Audrey, Mr. Harrison, began gesturing for me to take the plush leather chair at the head of the table. "We cannot begin to express our absolute gratitude for the incredible discretion and brilliance you showed during the Klaus investigation." The federal government had been meticulously tearing through Klaus' corporate logistics empire for months. The Securities and Exchange Commission had seized assets, frozen accounts, and indicted dozens of executives in both Germany and the United States. But my firm had emerged completely unscathed. Because I had gathered the encrypted ledgers independently and submitted the anonymous tip directly to the federal authorities with surgical precision, I had successfully isolated the firm from the blast radius. If I had simply tried to blow the whistle internally, Klaus would have used his massive influence to bury the evidence, and the entire firm would have eventually been raided by the FBI for complicity in international money laundering. I had saved their multi-million-dollar reputation. "We know we made a terrible error in judgment when we suspended you," another senior partner chimed in, sliding a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished wood table. "But we want to make it right. We want to offer you a position as a full senior partner. This package includes a massive increase in your base salary, a corner office, and a highly lucrative equity stake in the firm." We need a mind like yours on our executive board. I looked down at the heavy envelope. 6 months ago, this was exactly what I had been working 80-hour weeks to achieve. I had sacrificed my sleep, my savings, and my sanity to climb this exact corporate ladder. They sat there watching me, completely confident that they had just purchased my loyalty with a fancy title and a large paycheck. I reached out and placed my hand flat on the envelope. I did not open it. Instead, I slowly pushed it back across the mahogany table toward Mr. Harrison. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely detached. "But I am formally declining. Consider this my immediate resignation." The boardroom went dead silent. Mr. Harrison's smile vanished, replaced by absolute shock. "Audrey, be reasonable," he stammered. "You will not find a better compensation package anywhere in Chicago. What we are offering you is the pinnacle of this industry. You are offering me a seat at a table that will throw me to the wolves the second a wealthy client demands it," I replied, standing up from the leather chair. "You did not protect me when Klaus threatened my career. You only value my brilliance now because it kept you out of federal prison. I am a forensic accountant. I calculate risk for a living, and this firm is a toxic liability I am no longer willing to underwrite." I did not wait for them to scramble for a counteroffer. I turned and walked out of the glass boardroom, leaving the executives sitting in stunned, humiliated silence. I took the elevator down to the street level and walked 2 blocks over to a beautifully restored historic brick building overlooking the Chicago River. I walked into a stunning, completely empty penthouse office space with floor-to-ceiling windows. DeAndre was already standing by the glass, looking out over the city skyline. He turned around as I walked in, holding 2 crystal tumblers and a bottle of expensive bourbon. "How did the resignation go?" DeAndre asked, pouring a generous measure into each glass. "Exactly as predicted," I smiled, taking a tumbler from his hand. "They offered me the world, and I told them I would rather build my own." DeAndre raised his glass. We had spent the last month quietly filing the paperwork for our new venture, a boutique, highly specialized forensic accounting and financial law firm. We were going to hunt down hidden assets, expose corporate fraud, and completely dismantle financial predators. "To the new empire," DeAndre said, his voice echoing in the bright open space. "To the new empire," I replied. We clinked our glasses together, the sharp sound ringing out like a starting bell. The corporate toxicity, the manipulative husband, and the arrogant billionaire were all completely behind me. I had survived the fire, and now I was going to own the ashes. A warm, late summer breeze drifted off Lake Michigan, carrying the rich, smoky scent of charcoal and grilling meat across the manicured lawn. I sat comfortably on the plush outdoor sofa of my back patio, holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive red wine. It was the exact same vintage Merlot I had poured into Klaus' glass on that fateful night at the steakhouse, though this time I was actually enjoying the complex flavor. My $1.5 million Lincoln Park home was perfectly beautifully quiet. The shattered crystal and torn wrapping paper from the disastrous baby shower had been swept away months ago. The invasive nursery furniture Brenda had purchased with stolen funds had been seized by federal agents. The house felt lighter now. It was finally truly mine again, completely cleansed of their toxic entitlement. Across the pristine stone patio, my sister Jasmine was laughing loudly at a joke her husband had just made. DeAndre stood at the massive outdoor stainless steel grill wearing a casual shirt instead of his usual intimidating courtroom suits, expertly flipping 3 thick-cut ribeye steaks. There were no fake smiles here. There were no hidden agendas, no manipulative gaslighting, and absolutely no parasites actively feeding off my hard work. There was just the genuine, unwavering warmth of the family I had actively chosen to keep in my life. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the deep flavors ground me in the present moment. It is incredibly strange how quickly a massive nightmare can dissolve when you absolutely refuse to play the role of the victim. Derek and his arrogant billionaire boss had designed what they thought was the perfect trap. They had weaponized a high-risk pregnancy, forged binding medical documents, and leveraged millions of dollars in stolen corporate wealth to completely bury me. They were absolutely certain that my emotional attachment to my marriage would blind me to their blatant financial crimes. They expected me to scream to cry and to beg for my cheating husband to come back home. They expected me to shrink under the crushing weight of their combined arrogance. But arrogance is a blinding, fatal flaw. It makes greedy people incredibly sloppy. It makes them leave a massive digital trail of breadcrumbs right to their own front door. I watched the evening sky slowly transition into a brilliant, fiery orange over the towering Chicago skyline. For 4 long years, I had made myself small to accommodate Derek's massive insecurities. I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks to fund his artistic dreams and his expensive medical treatments, while he secretly plotted to steal my entire future. He mistook my unwavering financial support for weakness. He mistook my practical, analytical nature for dullness. They both did. They thought because I was quiet, I was blind. But silence is just the sound of someone doing the math. While they were busy hosting lavish parties in my living room and bragging about their stolen wealth to their friends, I was running the algorithms. I was cross-referencing the offshore ledgers, securing the irrevocable property trust with DeAndre, and building an ironclad federal case. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a public tantrum to destroy them. I just needed to hand the raw, undeniable data to the people who possessed the power to lock them away. Now Klaus was locked in a maximum security European holding cell, his massive logistics empire completely dismantled and liquidated. Derek was serving a multi-year federal prison sentence, permanently stripped of the immense luxury he had sold his soul to acquire. And Brenda was trapped in a miserable reality of her own making, wearing a grease-stained fast food uniform, while mourning the billionaire lifestyle she genuinely thought she was entitled to. They had built a massive, intricate house of cards, and I had simply opened the window and let the wind do the rest. The profound peace I felt sitting on my patio tonight was not just the absence of conflict. It was the unshakable quiet confidence of a woman who knew her exact worth and refused to let anyone discount it ever again. Jasmine walked over and gently clinked her wineglass against mine, offering a warm, knowing smile. We had survived the storm together. The new boutique forensic accounting firm we launched was already thriving. My assets were permanently secured, and my future was entirely my own to write. Have you ever let your enemies dig their own graves before handing them the tombstone? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love seeing how you handle the toxic people who try to test you. If my journey resonated with you, hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a strong reminder that they are far more powerful than the lies they are being told. And remember, never underestimate the person holding the calculator. Like and subscribe for more. The story of Audrey's ruthless triumph over her treacherous husband and his billionaire boss offers a profound masterclass in the power of emotional detachment and strategic silence. When faced with deep, devastating betrayal, our natural human instinct is to react loudly. We want to scream, demand immediate answers, and force those who hurt us to acknowledge our pain. However, this narrative powerfully illustrates that reacting emotionally often gives manipulators exactly what they want. A hysterical, unpredictable victim they can easily discredit or blame to cover their own tracks. Audrey's greatest weapon was not just her brilliant forensic accounting background. It was her absolute refusal to break under pressure. By maintaining a calm, almost submissive exterior, she manufactured a false sense of security for her enemies. Klaus and Derek were blinded by their own arrogance, believing they had outsmarted a compliant wife. Yet her silence was never submission. It was the quiet, active calculation of a devastating counterstrike. She adhered strictly to the timeless rule, never interrupt your enemy when they are making a fatal mistake. By stepping back, she allowed them to fully document their fraud-forged legal documents and literally dig their own graves while they prematurely celebrated their victory. This teaches us an invaluable lesson about self-worth and navigating conflict in our own lives. True power does not require you to prove your point in the heat of the moment or match a toxic person's chaotic energy. True power lies in knowing your facts, quietly securing your boundaries, and letting undeniable truth and natural consequences do the heavy lifting. Take a moment today to evaluate where you might be wasting your emotional energy on toxic people and choose instead to quietly invest that power into protecting your own peace and future.